Storm is a Marvel Comics character, but I've already done all Marvel episodes and reviews, so the next best thing is this. At the same time though, I don't want to put this into the actual review of Korra vs. Storm as it doesn't really fit, so it's getting its own set. This is every episode that involves a comic book character not from Marvel or DC. There are a few I've already talked about those, so let's go over those. Shredder vs. Silver Samurai and Deadpool vs. The Mask were reviewed in my Marvel vs. non-DC episodes, Leonardo vs. Red Ranger Jason in my Season 7 retrospective, Scrooge McDuck vs. Shovel Knight, yes, Scrooge McDuck debuted in the comic book, was reviewed in my Star vs. Steven review, and Amy Rose vs. Ramona Flowers was reviewed in my Mario and Sonic Death Battles review. So let's just get to the actual reviews of this one.
And for some reason, in all his infinite wisdom, the great Master Splinter gave the most complicated weapon to Booster Gold.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Battle Royale is an episode that I want to like so much, and seeing as we have 4 analysis segments, let's go through each one and discuss them in detail. Leonardo shows us immediately the interesting part of this concept. Any feats in scaling are completely non-existent due to the shared nature of each combatant's stats, and the backstory is also explained immediately at the start, so we can focus just on the characters without it taking up too much time. Leo's analysis is fine. I initially wrote that it had an okay joke, but then I remembered the only half-decent joke related to Leo is actually in the next episode, so this one ends up as so forgettable and lame that I'm remembering the next one more than this. Donatello's analysis is a bit better, with actual jokes that playfully lampshade the idiocy of the character's concept as a sewer-dwelling reptile that somehow knows about technology to this extreme. Though Boomstick saying it takes a lot of time and patience to kill anybody with a stick feels a little odd when this stick is a big, thick chunk of wood closer to a baseball bat than a twig. It'd be like if someone swung around a big fucking tree and he said, "Takes a lot of time to kill someone with a stick." Overall, it's probably my second favourite segment of the episode's analyses. Michelangelo's is the worst, and it should be no surprise. It's not even too bad at the start, I mean, it is, but without any context what comes after, it's probably fine. Boomstick wrongfully assuming Michelangelo is on drugs is something I'd probably find charming in a better analysis, but the fact that Wiz also thinks something is wrong with him is a bad omen. Somehow the bong joke is probably the only bit of the episode I actually got a laugh from though, which is sad. But Wiz going in and just complaining about the nunchaku and saying it's a terrible weapon despite how he's clearly good with it in-universe, then dropping one of the few genuine slurs we've gotten in the show's history in a very derogative way is kinda just not okay. But there's more than one slur? Yeah, there's this one.
Pinky's spastic demeanor might make her seem like a hapless child,
though that's seemingly more of a slur in British English-speaking regions than otherwise. So yeah, Mikey's is terrible and bad and probably the worst rundown for a fictional character we ever have and ever will get. Raphael's, meanwhile, is probably my favourite of the episode. They actually go into some detail on the weapons and how they work, and it's just the one I overall enjoy the most. Though it's weird they bring up Raph becoming the Shredder as an example of his anger, when in that series he was just using the mantle to intimidate criminals into not being so bad or something like that. And then we get into the fight, and I kind of like it and kind of don't. On one hand, they make it very clear that Raph is the character most prone to throwing the first punch. Leonardo then throws the first attack overall, and the first actual punch thrown is by Mikey. On the other hand, basically everything here that has nothing to do with Mikey is really good. Donatello's 2 scenes where he fights Raph are well done, keeping his distance and having the advantage without Raph being totally out of it. Donatello vs. Leo is well done as well, but Leo staying here to get pounded on seems really dumb even if I know what it's referencing. Yeah, Leo's sword is stuck in the crate, but he's got 2 of them and he's fine with fighting with just a single one, and he can risk not having his second sword for a while if it means avoiding having his skull caved in. But Raph jumping in and getting his revenge on Donnie in one of the most viciously unnecessary shows of blood in the show is pretty good and demonstrates Raph's character well. The final bout is also well done, with some tight action and choreography and ending with a genuinely tense final bit where you can just anticipate Raph breaking Leo's swords and winning. Both of them get off a final stab in the desperation when the swords break, and it's revealed that Leo won, but not unscathed. This might be one of, if not the first time a loser came out with a noteworthy injury to show the fight was actually tough. This would easily be a 7 out of 10 for Season 1 standards, if Mikey wasn't also there. He gets 2 scenes. One's fairly decent where he fights Leo for a bit where he isn't totally outmatched, but then we see him dying with ease. You know, I commented on Vol not getting the shaft, but everyone knew after I said that the time would come for Mikey to get brought up. Yep, it's docking a whole point off of its own of this episode. And the conclusion is good enough, explaining what happened in the fight well, which is the part of the Season 1 conclusions that I think definitely gave the show the reputation of the fight mattering and things being done when the fight disproving the episode's result that I still see today. Even though something being dumb in the fight can just be criticized as being dumb instead of given some higher meaning for no reason. I kinda like them going into depth on the 2007 movie's fight, with 2 good points against it being Leo's hesitation in the fight and domination in the fist clash, and 2 bad points being it was purely for the plot, which without proper clarification is not a solid argument as you need to go into detail on how the plot-induced stupidity affected the characters, and that the movie makes no sense anyway. Going into Turtle Anatomy was at least kinda neat. 6 out of 10, and I am being generous there. The main reason for me is that the final clash is so tense and well done, it gets it above a 5. At the time of this episode's release as well, the R word, as I'm going to call it, to my knowledge wasn't seen quite as bad as it is nowadays, more so out of ignorance than anything else. That does not defend the episode. I'm not defending the usage of the word, but I do understand why more thought wasn't put into the line prior to the release. There wasn't as much thought put in because it was at a time where they didn't think it was as bad as it really is, because people were very ignorant to a lot of these things. And I also think removing the slur would not fix the episode. If Wiz had said the dumbass of the group, it would not magically make the episode better. People focus on the slur, and for very good reason, but everything around it is also really, really bad. Mikey's analysis is not bad because of the slur, it's bad and elevated to a worse level because of the slur. Do you not realize how generous I am being to this episode with this score of 6 out of 10? This is the most generous 6 I've ever given, probably the most generous score I've given, period. And also, I do like that the ending clips are different versions of each of the turtles. That's a nice touch.
The Ninjakin is, in fact, unnecessarily overcomplicated clubs with the effectiveness of a tattered fly swatter. Seriously, who came up with these things? They're preposterous.
Like the moon landing.
Shut up.
I forgot this episode existed. This might be one of the biggest wastes of potential they've ever done. Not because of the potential of the matchup, but the concept of a battle royale where the winner then goes on to face a solo opponent. The first royale, due to not needing stats, focuses on the important abilities and nothing shared between the fighters for a shorter rundown. But then the analysis for the solo outing gets to go into the actual stats and more detail on abilities that all the turtles have, and specific individual ones as well, getting a bit more clarification. Instead, we get basically the same analysis, but this time there's the moon landing joke I enjoy and Asian Yoda. Somehow, it's even less detailed. It doesn't even bring up his weaknesses like last time. How did that happen? The fight is then also just sort of there. It's not bad by any means, and probably about as good as the previous episode in the sense it has a good dynamic and some actual fighting that's fine. It's just... Leo does decent and straightforward melee, but he's clearly overwhelmed and wouldn't win in the long run. Leo uses his brains to give himself an advantage with a neat little sequence where Leo uses the environment to his advantage against Zitz, leading to a death that's really cool in concept, but kinda sucks in execution. The idea of Leo sneaking around and aggro Zitz as he brings the old sewer down then killing him is cool, but Zitz doesn't look like he's trying to bring the sewer down, he looks like he's just wailing on a wall. If he was throwing attacks around, visibly damaging the area, causing parts to break apart, that'd be cool. Instead he's just beating on a wall, then Leo jumps out and cuts him in half. Somehow Leo had a harder time in his fight with Raph. If anything, this episode is better than the last purely for not shitting on one of the characters, but it's still just a 6 out of 10.
Oh man, here comes the rage from the God of War fanboys.
Kratos vs. Spawn is an episode that sure does exist. It's not a bad one, and I do like it, but it could have been so much better. This is one of the biggest examples of an episode that really should have come out nowadays instead of back then, because I guarantee it would be a banger. I mean, this isn't even that bad of a matchup conceptually. Obviously the analysis is bad but charming. Spawn's I enjoy, Kratos is fine, but I couldn't help but notice all of his equipment was just from God of War 3, which I get, but also bad, because imagine if they did it for any other character. Dante vs Bayonetta, but it's only Devil May Cry 3 and Bayonetta 2. Goku vs Superman, but it's only Namek Saga Goku and Superman Exile Superman. It's just weird, especially when they don't explicitly make note of the restrictions they're putting on the episode. The fight on the other hand is really good for its time, with a good conveyance of speed and some good sound design and style to make meaty impacts meaty. It doesn't have anything particularly wow exciting, but I enjoy the dynamic well enough for season 1. Kratos is really violent and aggressive, while Spawn is a bit more casual and methodic, taking time to observe what Kratos does. The start with the two throwing out their most basic attacks was cool, with Spawn's chains blocking Kratos, and Kratos just blocking gunfire with its blades no problem. Spawn going on the offensive, but Kratos getting the upper hand the moment Spawn tries to take the fight to him is also cool. It goes to show Kratos is probably a more skilled fighter. Spawn takes a moment to be smart and take Kratos by surprise, winning this exchange by having his attempt to attack once Kratos recovers thrown back in his face. It's a little weird how Kratos' fleece just magically appears out of nowhere, but I'll live. Kratos here starts using his more diverse weapons, punching Spawn away with his gauntlets and using the wings of Icarus to fight back when Spawn starts flying over a pit. I really like Kratos hanging off a wall using one arm to stab into Spawn as he flies and dragging the two of them down lower, which I guess could be interpreted as the two descending into Hell/Tartarus if you really want. Kratos goes for his bow and Spawn blocks with his cape, which is a little weird seeing how every other time he blocks in this episode he has his chains to it. Kratos goes for his fire arrows, Spawn controls the fire to engulf him, which is a very confusing scene that I know a lot of people find, well, confusing. It sort of just looks like Spawn swung out his hand and then Kratos was charging his fire arrow for too long. Especially not helped with how Spawn doesn't do anything visibly with his hand, and then he just fires a little tiny laser that blows Kratos up, which seemingly has nothing to do with what he was doing before, and just a green effect on the fire would have made it a bit more clear. Kratos jumping out with the Blade of Olympus, and this time contrasting with the initial chain versus weapon moment by smashing through the chains of Letha with ease, and landing that one big ass blow on Spawn is a genuinely hype moment for season 1, it's really cool. Then Spawn just grabs Kratos and kills him. I guess the visual of the blade going out the back of Kratos' head is really well done, but the way Kratos just gives up, his sword vanishes, and it just happens out of nowhere is weird and awkward. Overall, I had more to say than I expected, but this fight is actually pretty smart for Season 1. It reincorporates elements from the start to the end and has some good character animation with Kratos focusing on raw power, and Spawn being smart about how he goes about the fight, not really taking Kratos all that seriously at the start. Stuff like this makes me think if this episode came out nowadays, it could be one of the best episodes in the series. Maybe even as a Blender episode, that's basically a perfect fit. I'm not going to clamour for a remake of it or anything. After all, we have Kratos vs Dante or Azura, and Spawn vs Ghost Rider, Demi-Fiend, Jackie Estacado, Edmund Dante's fucking Saint Killers from Preacher. All good matchups that are probably better than an unnecessary redux. Overall, a 7 out of 10 episode, for Season 1 standards of course.
I know what you're thinking. Just who is Captain Bucky O'Hare? Well, prepare to be reminded or introduced to the greatest cartoon rabbit since Bugs Bunny.
The Spring Bonnie animatronic.
Fox's analysis is roughly 4 minutes long, and Bucky's is roughly 3. That should say something about the quality of the analysis for this episode. Fox's is pretty good. It's as detailed as Season 2 analyses often get, it has some fun jokes, and feels like it's full of love. Bucky's still has passion and love, but lots less thought and work put in. Bucky's analysis includes a full minute of just the intro sequence of the cartoon, leaving us with around a minute and 57 seconds of actual Bucky analysis, and that's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Bucky's analysis feels like it was just going off the one guy who actually watched the show, remembering a few scenes from it, and going on nothing but that without actually rewatching the show proper. The fight is good at least. It has a ton of issues like an awkward pacing at the start and a lot of dumb moments, but at least it's fun. Especially in the air battle. Like, I know this is probably meant to be Bucky dodging, but it looks more like Fox jumped over Bucky and didn't do anything as Bucky fought back. The R-Wings and the Righteous Indignation just look like PNGs. Fox shooting at this rock looks kinda dumb. I don't know why Bucky pauses progressively longer when he's jumping on Fox, even if I like the idea of this bit and how it ends. Bucky and Fox are missing shots at the start of their flying battle for no reason. Fox uses the shine to block Bucky, who isn't even being reflected, he's just missing completely. He then throws a grenade, and Fox for some reason needs to slowly throw the shield and dash away, instead of just turning his shine off, which he's done twice in this fight already. There are good things, of course. I like Fox losing his metal legs, and then the second G diffuser they said he had being used to launch himself at the mid-air Bucky, then choking him out and blowing his head off. Even if Bucky's entire face being a soul slabber meat is hilarious. I like the 3D fighting bit in the air, that looks really nice, and everything else is perfectly fine. It's just a shame that for the most part the rest of the episode peaks with Fox's analysis at the start, has a really boring and lame Bucky analysis, and then a perfectly mediocre fight in conclusion. It's not a bad episode, I give it a low 7, but it's not as good as I remember, which kinda stinks. I mean, it could be worse though.
Hey, buddy, do you mind? You're hogging my spotlight here.
Know your place!
What? Wait, is this guy serious?
I hate that I have to explain this shit to people who won't listen and will complain in the comments, why are you including Mob vs Tatsumaki? Regardless of what I say, proving they absolutely have not watched the video and commented preemptively and now look stupid. When I said non-Marvel vs DC Comics, that included webcomics. While Mob Psycho 100 and One Punch Man are most known for their anime adaptations and have very iconic manga adaptations, and they originated in Japan from one Japanese author, they originated as webcomics. No one calls them web manga, everyone calls them web comics. One Punch Man debuted in 2009 as a webcomic, with a 2012 manga adaptation and a one-season 2015 anime adaptation. Yes, I know what I said. Mob Psycho 100 debuted in April 2012 as a webcomic, and this webcomic is often considered the same as the manga, but it is first and foremost a comic that was published online. At the very least, Tatsumaki counts as a non-Marvel DC comic book character to a certain extent, and while I wouldn't group her in with the rest if I was discussing Death Bell's usage of comics outside of Marvel and DC, due to that heavy association with anime, I would count her for the purposes of this review, especially seeing as I've talked about the only other One Punch Man episode in another video and spoilers alert I didn't like that very much. What do I think of this one though? I like the analysis well enough. It's cool to see them talking about series I really like, such as these ones, going over their stories well enough and proving that any bullshit excuse you hear for why Death Bell should interrupt a well-flowing early bit of story with some calc is just dumb. These analyses would not be better if they were done like Korra, Steven, or Goku Black, like,
You probably wouldn't think twice about this plain-looking boy with a bowl cut. Still, when his life is in danger or his friends need protecting, Mob's psychic ability manifests as something truly phenomenal. In his duel with Claw's boss, Toichiro, Mob took this huge crushing hit. We found Mob survived an attack worth over 80 tons of TNT.
it just would not be as good. Even so, it's not like these are perfect. The cutaway gags aren't anything special. The one in Tatsumaki's I don't mind at least, because, you know, Wiz making Boomsy think he succeeded changing the channel is nice. But Mob's is just lame. It's blatantly obvious where this joke is going, and the slap from Wiz that knocks Boomsy out doesn't feel any more impactful than the first two. Overall, it's fine. The fight, meanwhile, has a ton of problems, but I love a lot about it. Let's start with the biggest issue I have with this animation, the wildly differing hand-drawn styles used throughout. And I want to address the biggest explanation I've seen, that this apparently matches the way art styles change in One Punch Man and Mob Psycho 100, and anyone who says this has no idea what they're talking about. Mob Psycho 100 generally doesn't do this very often for one thing, it's very much a One Punch Man thing. Mob Psycho only changes styles for the look of unknown percent, but the problem really is this animation does not do it the way One Punch Man does. One Punch Man primarily has three very distinct animation styles. A normal, highly detailed and dynamic style, with the only exception to that being Saitama's plain look even in this style, a smaller and more simply designed one that are used for comedic value, and the unreasonably highly detailed Saitama style when they want to emphasize his power. These art style changes are not arbitrary, they all have explainable reasons behind them whenever they're used. This episode doesn't have that. There are two instances where it's explainable. When Tatsumaki's thrown and she's in a smaller chibier style for comedic effect, that works. And the bits with unknown percentage mob where he's drawn differently are fine as well. However, then we have this sort of pixely looking hand-drawn style which closely resembles very high quality pixel art, then it directly cuts to a very clean hand-drawn looking style, there's this less detailed pixel art style which is more dynamic while being less on model, there's this really off-model deformed looking style that never really works with Tatsumaki, giving her these massive thunder thighs and tiny potato head, and there's a heavily shaded looking style for 100% mob which, considering it's just for this one shot, is fine enough. The issue is there's no consistency to it. In One Punch Man, you don't just have Saitama randomly change to a different style for no reason. It's either to emphasize his power or for comedic value. It's never just arbitrary like in this episode. If, say, one character being in one style and the other character was in another was done, that could have been a cool artistic choice to differentiate the two in the same way the colored effects are for them. If Mob was primarily in a heavy aligned style matching his series and Tatsumaki in a less heavily aligned one and there was a third middle ground between them when their hand-drawn scenes interact, that would be fine, but that's not what they do. We cut from pixel Mob to clean Tatsumaki to clean Mob for no discernible reason. It's a little distracting. Not to mention the fact they break the 180 rule here. Especially because aside from this one style, I like all of these and would rather see a fully explored animation that uses a single one to its fullest. My other issues are also the way the fight starts. Tatsumaki as the aggressor obviously makes sense, but the reason she attacks Mob is kind of out of character. I know Tatsumaki has this reputation and she does this sort of stuff to Genos, but he's a rubber and it can be repaired. She knows there's no problem in throwing him around. She is by her nature, however, a hero. She saves people. She wouldn't go for a move on what she thinks is a regular child that would kill anyone else if it happened to not be him that she hit. Even if I do like how Mob just casually walks out the damaged wall and brushes himself off like nothing happened. And I guess if we're on problems, the unknown percentage transformation seems a bit rushed. She crushes him, turn around, and then bam, he's in unknown. I don't know, for some reason it feels like we should have had a shot where we see Mob falling unconscious here as the two halves collide around him. Let's say, for instance, if I was to ad-lib an idea, completely off script. Right here, after this point, we get a hand-drawn shot of Mob straining and being unable to stop the two halves from crashing into him and knocking him out. After that, we have a bit of a pause, then the area starts shaking. We see the green aura around the big ball slowly flicker into purple when Tatsumaki then turns around. We zoom in on a full frame shot of the crushed city ball completely silent before it explodes and unknown percentage flickers on screen as everything goes white. That's off the top of my head my idea. But then aside from those issues, I think this animation is stellar. There's a lot to like here. The starting shot of Tatsumaki throwing a building by reducing it to a crushed mash that she beams at Mob is a good shot. And the dynamic of the fight shifting over time works to its advantage. She dominates Mob just in his base as you'd expect, and the shot of her flying up the building really conveys the speed well. We get this ugly hand-drawn bit, and then Tatsumaki in one of the two times her sprite is noticeably tilted and looks really flat. Then there's the 100%, which is a bit weird in that we don't know the emotion he's feeling, which is kind of important, as, you know, 100%'s action and what it does depends on his emotion. But we don't know what emotion it is. But it looks stunning, and Mob's thorough beatdown of Tatsumaki is very satisfying, with the power and speed of Mob being conveyed brilliantly. And I do find Tatsumaki's "what" to be fairly comedic. Mob firing off attacks that Tatsumaki dodges and throws back only to be blocked by Mob shows off well how Tatsumaki has to dodge if she goes to counterattack, because she can't block and attack simultaneously, while Mob can just attack while sitting there in his shield, and it's a cool bit. We get Tatsumaki tearing up a chunk of the city and crushing Mob with it, which looks pretty good and gets the impact across well. There's the other flat Tatsumaki moment. Unknown percentage comes out and looks stunning. It is perfect, and it has some real dynamic shots that sell the chaotic power of this state. This sequence has shots like Tatsumaki flying across the landscape avoiding Mob's lobbed skyscrapers, Mob effortlessly selling Tatsumaki's attack, and the lead-in of Tatsumaki calling in the meteor for later. Mob lays Tatsumaki out, which is amazing. It's the only hands thrown in the fight, and it makes sense for it to be Mob doing it. You hear that, Strange vs. Fate? You can do a fight where they're not throwing hands for most of it. You have him slamming Tatsumaki around with a car and then destroying the car using her body. The impact of Mob's final slam is also just great, as you get to see how far away he goes for his charge in. Mob crunching Tatsumaki's arms around is nasty, and you can hear some great sound design. And unfortunately, the voice acting doesn't quite work for me. The fact that Tatsumaki doesn't really scream in pain and anguish kind of just deflates a lot of the impact. It would feel a lot better if she actually just really screamed in pain, and then that led into her next line, where she reveals she's kind of fine. Also, I don't know why the meteor is the one thing a character moves in this fight that doesn't have an aura. Even when Tatsumaki drops it on Mob, you can kind of see that Mob has a green aura breaking his purple one, you know? So why is there no green aura on the meteor she's moving? And like, I know it could just be she sent it down flying and she's not actually controlling it currently, but then that's some great aim, and I just assume the reason Mob was able to so easily overcome Tatsumaki's green aura with his purple one is because she was attacking and she couldn't defend at the time, which is how he took advantage of it. And unfortunately, I don't quite like how the final bit of this goes. Mob's big arm-breaking body horror doesn't feel like it did anything, as Tatsumaki easily just snaps her bones back into place and uses that healing factor she doesn't have to repair the shattered bones, nerves, and muscle fibers. Then we get, that shot. Fingers longer than her head. And then there's a conclusion which is really in-depth and well done. The only thing I wish they did was address the quote from 1, because I see a lot of people misquoting it as him saying that unknown percentage Mob would beat Tatsumaki, when actually he just said he doesn't know who would win. I love especially that they went into the energy of the broccoli growth, but I dislike especially them saying Mob would win 40% of the time, then making it come across as extremely one-sided. According to them, Tatsumaki is 6 times faster and thousands of times more powerful than Mob's shield, meaning that the only way Mob could ever win based on their given stats is if Tatsumaki chose not to destroy his shield and crush him. So yeah, I like that episode. Probably a solid 8 out of 10. If they ironed out the issues with the hand-drawn bits, which were my main problem, I'd probably be willing to push it to a 9. But as is, that issue which persists for the entire animation does bring it down for me. Still, I quite enjoyed it. And that was the review, and it was a very mixed bag. I can't say I disliked any of these episodes, but there wasn't much that got me terribly excited, with only the last one being especially interesting. 2 episodes were mediocre, 2 episodes were good but could have been better, and 1 episode was really good. This doesn't really have anything to do with Core vs. Storm, but with any luck, that episode will turn out to be a much better episode than any of these. Or at least, a better episode than the 3 from Season 1.